interaction design. So I'm specifically going to talk about the different processes of interaction design and also the practice and like specifically industry practices that you don't normally learn in school. Yeah. So first I'd like to kind of talk about my own background and where I'm coming from with my presentation. This is me on the screen. So I would like to talk about my design ethos first and how that really frames everything I want to do moving forward, especially. I really see design as being a way to augment how people interact and not really replace it. And that's really what kinds of products I want to work on in the future. I'm also really interested conceptually in the natural sciences and working on products that raise awareness for like climate change and other kinds of things like that. So that's really also conceptually where I want to move my work towards. So I'd like to introduce myself first in that way. So my interest in design really stems from my childhood. I've always seen design as the intersection between art and science, something that can be expressive, but also is within constraints. Working on art projects, scrapbooks, and things like that, very young. And I really wanted to also incorporate that in my career in some way. So that's really what I wanted to study design for. I'm interested in physical making, like industrial design, along with like digital making, which is what I do now in my career as a UX designer. I was also interested in designing solutions for a variety of people, and that's really what you can do as a UX designer working in any type of industry now, as they are hired in various domain spaces. So that's something I also wanted to do and understand how different people needed digital solutions to solve their needs. So in terms of my academic background, I went to the University of Michigan. I did a dual degree in art and design and information science. So I actually have both a BA and a BS. And with my dual degree, I was able to take a really wide set of courses from art studios to programming labs and gain a wide skill set and theoretical backing. I think what was most valuable for my portfolio were the UX and interaction design courses that I took, which then led me into the projects and internships that I wanted, which then led me into the kind of industry positions that I'm applying to. I think one of the most valuable things in college is really forming connections with other students and professors that you like their work in. Because once hopefully you're in a major that you already like and what you want your career to be in, and then once you graduate, you can already leverage your network you have to work on projects, maybe start a startup, do research. So having those connections early on will already kind of fuel your career for you. So in terms of my work experience, I'm currently working as a freelancer for a small healthcare startup. I'm really designing their very first applications for them to get funding and then build out their full product. But prior to that, I worked at GE Aviation as a UX designer in Detroit, very close to Ann Arbor, where I went to school. So while I was there, I specifically designed for 2 features on the most used application in GE Aviation supply chain pillar. And then throughout college, I've worked on various research and industry projects. If any of you are interested in research specifically, I can also answer questions on that. And the academic field behind that is human-computer interaction, or HCI. Yep, so I'd like to kind of just introduce interaction design before going more in depth into it. So interaction design is inherently interdisciplinary. It's not something where there's a strict definition for it. There's people with computer science, psychology, design, architecture, human factors, such a range that I really can't put a strict definition to it. And because of that, people who work in industry also come from different backgrounds. And you'll realize that working in an industry position. And I think when forming teams for that, they also choose people from different backgrounds who can offer what they know as opposed to someone else. Its application can also range in media and form. So interaction design can be something that's 2D, like a graphic poster, or also something that's 4D, like a virtual reality game. So it can range from physical to virtual, or no, physical to, yeah, virtual 2D to 4D. It can be anything, and because of that, every discipline really engages with it. It can also range in its commercial usage. So interaction design as practice in industry is like a UX designer who works for a company. They work on products that are sold for money. It's very commercial, but it can also be very speculative and experimental. People can make products that go into like art galleries or researchers who write publications. So that can vary as well. And its distinguishing factor is really the addition of time. So compared to like graphic design or product design, interaction design involves human interaction that occurs over time. And that's really what we design as UX designers, the user flow, the different UI elements that someone would interact with when they go through a process. So that's really its distinguishing factor, but it borrows from every other discipline. Okay, so these are a few kind of main events that I think are critical in interaction design history. It's definitely not everything that's happened because there's so much. I also wanted to make sure to include people that you should definitely know as interaction designers and read about them and their work. So the first person is Douglas Engelbart, who I've listed here. He, in 1968, had this demo. It's often called the mother of all demos. So the way what he presented was having a graphical user interface that was being manipulated by a computer mouse. It was the first time anyone has ever showed that in such a way, because previous to that, you could only manipulate a GUI using like code that wasn't done kind of in real time with the user. So the way he presented that really formalized HCI as a field as well, seeing that people could directly interface with the computer in such a way. Okay, so the second event, which occurred in 1982, was under ACM, which is the large like research organization. The CHI conference, the DEI conference, maybe some of you have heard of it, are the big HCI conferences that fall under that. So this association formalized the SIG-CHI kind of subdivision, which then also led HCI to be kind of a formal field that people could pursue research in and write publications. In 1986, Bill Moggridge, I believe, and Vera Plank formalized interaction design as a term. Previously it was called user interface design, which is still used, but interaction design accounts more so for the user's needs and views it more from a design perspective as opposed to a computer science perspective. In 1988, Don Norman wrote The Design of Everyday Things. Maybe some of you have read it. I definitely read it while I was in class. I think it's a very critical book that provides a cog-sci and psych background to design as to why people want certain things designed in certain ways. So that was also a very influential book. And I know he teaches at UCSD now, I believe, so it'd be someone cool to contact. Okay, so design practice. Sorry, I'm so out of breath. I don't know why. I'm gonna drink some water. Okay, so the first kind of area of interaction design I'd like to go into is digital product design. This is what type of kind of position or industry that most UX designers work in. So these are in-house product teams within companies in which UX designers are embedded into them. And what I mean by that is, for example, if you're working on Gmail, there might be like 10 teams working on Gmail. You might be working specifically on the like menu that organizes like your trash, for example, and that might just be your team. So you would be a UX designer working with 10 other developers, a manager, a QA tester, and like a UX researcher, for example. This is in-house work, so you're just working on Gmail, just working on the trash feature or button. And yeah, so I've kind of gone over that. The working processes, the deliverables are pretty tailored to the company. Most of these companies work in an Agile Scrum environment, which I'll talk about later. And I think it's great knowing that as a student because I didn't know what that meant. And almost every company uses that process. I've also hyperlinked specific products within companies that I really liked. So I know this presentation will probably be shared out after, so you guys can look at it here. Design consulting is a different type of environment, and it's also something I'm very much interested in kind of moving into the future. This is where different consultancies or agencies will interface with clients to deliver solutions for them. So a consultancy might have 10 different clients that they interact with. And a designer who works for a consultancy might take on like 3 different projects across different domains with different needs. So it's much more varied, probably a quicker pace as well. You're not seeing something all the way through development. You're just handing off your design to the client company who might develop it or give it to another third-party developer. The solutions also tend to be more varied. So this is not just like digital products that the solutions are. They could be marketing, kind of brand guides, social media campaigns, really anything. IDEO is a great example and a company that I've always wanted to work for. They also have a wide breadth of solutions, and I've like included a few here, but I would definitely check out IDEO. It's also just great knowing IDEO as an interaction designer because so many influential designers have worked there. Yeah, and this is industrial research labs. So these are labs that are within companies that do research for the company. This is different than research in academia, which is done like at a university, even though they both kind of do the same thing where they write research papers, go to conferences. Your professors probably too. So these researchers work usually with other researchers, but their research is usually leveraged by commercial teams to do any kind of product innovation. Microsoft, Google have huge research labs where they utilize the research for their commercial products that they put out on the market. It's probably not as strict of a working process. I don't know any researchers personally that work in this type of environment, so I can't ask them, but I'm sure it's more exploratory and they probably have longer timelines to get their work out. Something that I also wanted to highlight is the MIT Media Lab, which is a research lab within a university that also has like industry connections. So it's a little bit of everything. And I've always liked their work, and it's also a graduate school that I'm considering going to. So I would also check out their work if you're interested. Okay, so the third one is experimental collectives. I really did not know how to title this group of work. These are really studios or organizations that produce work that are very speculative, provocative. They could engage with industry or they may not. A lot of their work is usually shown at like art galleries or installations like to the public. But they do include aspects of interaction design and thinking about how people use their products or artwork. There's usually not a strict working process, but there are deliverables that they do have to put out, so it's not just completely loose. No, I'm not sure. This is probably the least group of organizations that you're familiar with, so I would definitely check out their work to familiarize yourself. Okay, so design process. So this is really walking through the process kind of from start to finish, the research, design, and testing. I'm not sure how familiar everyone is, so I've kept this pretty high level, but if there are any questions as to specifics, I can definitely answer any kind of methods or tools that I use. So the UX design process should really follow research, design, and testing. Research is to understand both product needs and user needs. So there's different kinds of methods you use to gather that type of research. Research can also be both qualitative and quantitative. Design is how you take the user needs and translate that into a solution. Design, or UX design, is often thought about just how it looks, but it's really not that at all. What it looks like is what you're doing by addressing the user needs. So I think people should not focus on the UI as much when thinking about UX. The testing is how you evaluate your design according to metrics, and these metrics are seeing whether you then accurately address your user needs through your design. So it's all a very cyclical process that really just ties back to the user at the end. So product research. So this is when kind of conceptualizing a product from the start, you want to see what's already out there. So ways to do that are doing like a competitive analysis, looking at similar products. Or if you're doing a redesign, you do like a heuristic evaluation where you evaluate the product that you already have and see what the major flaws are to improve upon that. User research is basically what it sounds like, getting research from your users. So I talked about both qualitative and quantitative ways. Qualitative, really, the ones I've done are interviews and surveys. quantitative being web analytics. Google Analytics is widely used in industry to gather this type of metrics in terms of what pages and features are being used the most. And that's probably likely what you'll do most in industry as well, is the quantitative user research. Okay, so design. So design takes your research and directly translates that into design, or that's how it should ideally be done. I'll talk again how in industry there are some shortcuts to how this process works, but yeah, so your design requirements should come from your research in terms of what people want out of this product and what pain points they want alleviated. From there, you can transition into sketching or go right into low fidelity prototyping to really just have a full prototype that you can test with users. After getting a little bit of user feedback, you can then have your high fidelity prototype, which has all of the visual design done according to like your company's branding guidelines or your own, and it's typically also digital. Low fidelity prototype can be on paper. Paper prototyping is what a lot of people do. Yeah. So this is understand how you want to evaluate your high fidelity prototype. I've listed a few both qualitative and quantitative metrics for that. So qualitative is, I've used like convenience and feeling some independence previously. Quantitative can be like number of completed tasks or time to complete tasks. When doing the testing, you also want to have a set of study materials ready to walk your prototype. So you would have to, that's what your interview protocol is. The questionnaire is the kind of in which people can evaluate their experience at the end, and then you can look at it with your team to determine what the scores were. And then the documentation spreadsheet is how you keep track of everything. Testing analysis is not something I have too much experience with, but something I'd like to get better at, which is how you take your data gathered from usability testing and make meaningful insights. I've done a little bit of this with the t-test, and also just graphing it in terms of like a bar graph or a box and whisker graph. But this is an area that I think is really valuable and what would set you apart from like a typical UX designer who really just focuses on design. Yeah, okay, sort of talking. So now I want to switch into a design activity. So I stopped talking less, and hopefully you can do more hands-on work too. This is something I've actually been given in an interview, so this is interesting. So I've done this before, but I want to see how you guys approach it. There is a Figma link here, which I can send out in the chat maybe. But if you guys don't have access to Figma or haven't used it before, like doing this on paper is fine. And maybe we can share out in some way. So,
yeah, so do you want to paste the Figma link into the chat and then maybe share your Figma screen?
Okay, yeah, that works.
After the design activity is explained, and then we can like take a couple minutes to do the activity, and then everyone, if you feel comfortable, share your work.
Okay, cool. So yep, I put it in the chat. So the way I've kind of laid this out is I put my name on a page here, and this is where I will be doing my work. So if everyone just wants to like claim a page and put their name on it, that would work, yeah. Okay, cool. So I will also do this while you guys do it, and maybe we can time it for like 10 minutes, does that work?
Yes, and then actually, do you want to keep the design activity on the screen so they can like refer back to it?
Okay.
I think that would make, so then I can refer back to the prompt and like what exactly to do.
Oh, I see. So do you want me to keep the presentation?
Yeah, I think that would be better, actually. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, that works, yeah. Okay, then I guess I'll just type this up. Yeah. Okay.
Sindhu, should we give everyone like 2 to 3 minutes more?
Yeah, I was going to say that. Yeah, I think a few more minutes are probably good.
So we'll come back at like 5:37, 38.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Alright.
So I can switch over to my other tab, Figma, and then I guess if someone maybe like wants to volunteer and share what they did, we can do that. Or I don't know, I could also talk about how I would have approached this. So
I can share, and then if anyone's comfortable, can share. And after that, you can like show everyone like your approach to it. So I did not like. This is just like I just did like a little jot down of like what I kind of do and like my plan for like this design challenge. So I kind of thought about, all right, this the last minute trip. So I'm assuming the tourists had no idea what activities they wanted to do, where to go for food, safety precautions, and like the nightlife. So I wanted to dedicate an app to meet these expectations. And as I was like talking about like the who, what, where, when, and why, I was kind of like realizing that this experience that this tourist wants is to make it as fast as possible because it's last minute and as easy and efficient and seamless. So I kind of thought about like creating like something kind of like agenda app or like something where you can like create your day just within like 5 minutes of browsing through like different like topics or different categories like food, um, bars, even like health hazards or like safety hazards, especially during COVID. So I was thinking of like having different features like that, that really like help a person like create their agenda for the day, and they can do it like whenever they want, wherever they want. The goal is to make sure they have something and they're able to find an activity or a food place within the like reach of their phone or reach of like the app that's being made. And then for success metrics, I was just like really emphasizing like the experience this tourist would have and like being really time efficient since they're really last minute going to Japan. Um, and then I didn't really touch on quantitative measures, but yeah, that was kind of my like approach to this design challenge. And yeah, does anyone else want to go? Someone might have just designed a whole interface, and that'd be really cool. But I just did like a little scribbles of like what I would think as a designer.
yeah. Yeah, I can also talk about what I did since
Yeah.
so what they were when I did it was, oh, am I
I think we're connected a little bit laggy, but I think you're good.
Okay. Okay. So what I really wanted to focus on was this idea of like souvenir shopping, and that's what I built my kind of idea out of how to ideally buy souvenirs for your friends and family. So what the actual app was like a mood board that someone could make for a friend, where they would like attach photos of their trip that reminded them of their friend, and this app would provide suggestions based upon these images, maybe like the colors or like the imagery that was in that mood board. So So it ended up being my final thing that I presented. Yeah, okay, so I want to wrap up my presentation by just talking about the things I've learned in industry in digital product design, which is pretty different and not usually what is talked about or taught in school. So hopefully you get an exposure to this early on. So coming out of school, going into industry, I realized a few things. So working in industry, your role as a UX designer is pretty narrow. I know in school you probably take classes across the board, maybe programming classes, art classes, I don't know, cog site classes too. But as a UX designer, your work really is designing wireframes and prototypes in a product team, and that's what your hands-on work will be. A lot of my work also wasn't conceptualizing something from the start, and I know that's how projects are really framed in school. Even this design challenge I showed was starting something from the beginning, but my work at GE was really working on existing pages or features and really redesigning them to make them better. And stages of the UX process are typically shortened or replaced in industry. Not everyone does a full phase of testing after designing something. Sometimes it goes right to the developers and it's implemented. So you have to really use your best judgment on what to compromise on or what to really push for, and this I think comes with experience. Yeah. So the first thing you'll realize working in industry, especially at a larger company, is that they have these set design systems. Design systems are a kind of set of UI components that designers should use when designing any kind of page, feature, product for that company. Google's design system is really well known. It's Google's material design, and that's something that's also open source for anyone to use. So that's what I mean by a design system. I think also early on, if you want to start incorporating a design system in your work and thinking about how systems work across products and iterations, different screen sizes, that would make you a very good designer and also showcase to employers that you're thinking about these things while still in school. So I talked about the Agile Scrum framework, and this is something that I think almost every kind of tech company follows. Any digital product design position would have to know what this is. So this is a framework in which developers and designers collaborate. So there's a sprint, which is a 2-week work cycle, and there's a certain amount of work assigned within 2 weeks that developers would have to do. Similarly for designers. Designers usually work ahead of developers to have their work ready to hand off for development. There's different organizations that provide like certifications and being able to understand Agile Scrum frameworks, also just courses I'm sure you can take to understand this process. There's also various project management tools that help facilitate the framework. And there's different kind of meeting rhythms and things that come into those. If you've heard of like stand-ups, that's part of the Agile Scrum framework, where everyone goes to a morning meeting to discuss what they've done. So it really is like kind of what dictates all of your work and your working processes in industry. So domain space knowledge, and this is something I realized is very critical as a UX designer, almost as critical as your actual design skill set. So understanding a domain, its users, the necessary tasks, helps you design for them. So when I was working at GE Aviation specifically, not many people know about the aviation industry in depth. We actually had a lot of meetings where we just learned about the aviation industry, the types of users that work for the industry, what their daily tasks are, just in order to better design for them. You'll also maybe do like ethnography studies if you get lucky. I think that would be very cool to do, where you actually go on site, observe your users and gather research that way. So yeah, and then I also touch on the fact that whenever you present work in your portfolio, it should always be contextualized with your research, the domain space, just providing the background as to what kind of design you've developed. Yeah. So cross-functional teams, this really ties back with the Agile Scrum framework as well. Likely as a designer, you will probably be working with other disciplines, but especially in a cross-functional team in like a technology company. So developers, managers are probably the people you'll work with the most. You might also have like a UX researcher on your team or a QA tester. And these people will provide different aspects to how you design. So a UX researcher would provide the user research. the developers would implement your work. Your project manager will have the overarching requirements for what you design. So it's important to be able to collaborate well with these people. As a UX designer, you don't often work by yourself in industry. I think that's very critical. So yes, so I talked about communication skills. It's also especially important if you are working with remote team members, which I will talk about next, I think, remote collaboration. So remote collaboration is very common, especially now, and I think it will become even more common. I had to work with remote UX team members at Giri Aviation, so I was co-located with my development team, but I was having remote UX team members. This was really hard because I had to work with them every day, and not being able to see your team members when you have to work with them every day is extremely difficult. So we had like a Slack channel, which I'm sure you guys know what that is, but also I established kind of daily 10-minute meetings to make sure I could convey any critical needs or changes immediately to my UX team, aside from all the other meetings that we had, like the reviews or stand-ups. So I think figuring out how to collaborate is important. Some people like a lot of communication, some people don't. They just want the deliverables. So I think establishing that with your team is key. Yeah, and I guess that's it. So thank you. I really enjoyed showcasing everything I've done throughout college and what I've learned in industry. I've also included a few of my kind of social media links, my portfolio, and my email as well, if you'd like to get in contact with me. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Sindhu, for sharing your experience, and obviously also sharing what is even interaction design, and specifically what it entails in the process. Before we do end this workshop, we do have a short Q&A panel. I believe Noor and Nicole are going to be leading the panel and asking some questions that might be curious with the audience, and also just like an overview from the presentation too. So Noor and Nicole, why don't you lead the Q&A panel? And if anyone has any questions throughout the Q&A panel, or if you have last minute questions, write them in the chat. We'll definitely ask and consider your questions. Thank you.
Should I keep my PowerPoint up, or?
And Nora will just take over shares.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Hi guys. My name's Noor. I'm CTD's branding officer. I'm leading the Q&A panel. We have our own questions, and after you guys can ask questions in the chat. I'm here with Nicole too. Nicole is just going to share a screen, and we'll get started. Okay, I think it's taking some time to share her screen, so I can just start with the first question. Can you tell us about one of your own personal projects?
Oh, okay, yeah, we can go into that. So like personal project aside from what I've done in industry, or like?
Yeah, like one of your favorite projects that you've done, anything really.
Yeah, gosh, can I open up my portfolio and maybe show
Yeah,
that?
you can go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I did, like I talked about, I did a dual degree, one of them being in art and design. So I also do have a lot of like artwork. Enjoyed that I did in college was this geomagnetic storm visualization. I think it's very much out there, and people really like looking at it when they look through my portfolio. So I was like an artist in residence, which meant that I essentially was tasked with developing kind of like a creative project at the end of my term at this space research lab. So I would go on a weekly basis to the space research lab's meetings and kind of gather research and inspiration. And my final project was this VR installation in like a cave room, which is a dedicated VR room. We have like there's kind of videos and documentation throughout it, but there's, you can find like a final video as well on my LinkedIn. Mm-hmm.
It's really cool. It's really like cool seeing interaction design implemented in projects. Mm-hmm. The next question we have is, can you describe the relationship between UX and interaction design?
Yeah, I think that's kind of confusing. people in industry use UX, product design, interaction design, kind of all interchangeably. I think UX design, the way it's used in industry, is really the design of interfaces. That's really what the type of roles you'll see that for. I think interaction design is a bit broader. It might include like physical products or like environments. That might be more like the design consulting companies that hire for interaction designers.
Yeah, it's honestly like really hard to like differentiate the both of them. I was doing some research and yeah, it was a little challenging. I know you shared some resources in your presentation, but do you have any books or websites that you really want to recommend?
Yeah, so I think the Design of Everyday Things, I shared that is a really good book to get started. I honestly look for inspiration really by looking at other projects, not necessarily reading books or articles. I look at a lot of the kind of projects both in research, like in Microsoft Research or Google Research, also from schools, like I love the MIT Media Lab. The Royal College of Art in London also has really good student projects, and then also like other companies like IDEO, Google. So just, I guess, look at other projects and see what inspires you and then try to develop work similarly.
All right, yeah, we'll take a note of those. It'll be really helpful for us. Just one more question before we go into the chat. Do you have any advice on landing design-related internships or jobs?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it's really tricky, I think, because what is taught in school doesn't really mirror how industry works, and you don't realize that until you go into industry. So I think having a end-to-end kind of case study to showcase in your portfolio, I think is important. One where you go through the research, design, and testing, you talk about the problem statement, and then like what you learned. I think just having one project like that will hopefully help you get an internship, and then you learn more about industry and then get like a full-time role. But it is like really hard. I will say that I am interviewing right now, so I definitely know what it's like out there.
Yeah, it's applying season, so it's kind of tough out here.
Okay.
Yeah, we're gonna move on to the chat. So if you guys have any questions, Nicole's gonna read them out. So you guys can go ahead and ask anything in the chat.
Kuba asked, what are some example experimental collectives? Are they really risky or done often?
Can I see the question too? Or
oh yeah, I don't know if I can show the chat. Can I share it? That'd be funny.
That's a great. I think I kind of got your question. Like, what are like experimental collectives and?
Yeah, I can re-put it.
Yeah, okay, I guess I can talk about this while you're doing that. Yeah, so experimental collectives, that's a term that I've just used. I don't know really what they call themselves. These are more geared towards interaction design, I would also say. So I'm guessing from like the tech field, not many people know about it, but it's really these groups who make kind of like art projects or maybe even like industry design projects that push the boundaries of what interaction design is. So it's more like speculative, more experimental. It could even be called research, but a lot of them don't do like publications like a typical researcher would do. So I've listed, I think looking through the examples I've posted with other help.
Thank you. Can you guys see the chat now, or is it not showing still?
You can't share your chat.
Yeah, it's not.
Okay, I guess I can open it up on my own too. Yeah.
Here, I can read a question. Nidhi asked, other than practicing design challenges, do you have any other advice for prepping for interviews?
Yeah, that's a good question. Right. So I think most of the interviews I've done aren't as much like testing design skills. It's more so how you work with other people, things like that. So I think, I mean, at least for kind of full-time industry positions, if you've already gotten to kind of the first or second round, you probably have some skills in design. They're not going to pick someone who doesn't. So at that point, they're not really looking to see if you can like use Sketch or InVision, but rather what the collaboration looks like. They might give you a design challenge if it's like kind of specific to their company, like if it's a healthcare company, they want to see how you address a healthcare problem. So I think that's what I would say. Is there, I don't know, have you guys like ran into any situations in interviews where it's been like hard for you to answer questions or, like, yeah. I'll ask that as like a follow-up question to you guys.
I think, I know me personally, I have not done any like interviews
Okay.
that have gone into length about doing design challenges, but more like just questions about like my design style and like collaboration
Yeah.
experience. I know there's a lot of people here who are just like beginners into design, so just kind of showcasing like what the process is to even land an internship is really nice too. So thank you for explaining all of that.
Yeah, I think I also want to add, so I guess in school, if you get any chance to work with like developers or other disciplines, I think you should definitely jump on those opportunities. I was definitely able to do that in school, and I think that's what made me also stand out, having that like, interdisciplinary communication skill set. So I think that's important.
That's very true. I agree with that. I think I've learned a lot from the research lab I'm currently in as well. So that's very helpful. I think Simran also asked a question, in your experience, what does the design interview process normally look like? And this will probably be the last question for today because we are running short on time. So yeah.
Yeah, so most interviews I've done are usually 3 stages. The first one is like a screening call with the recruiter. It's usually like 30 minutes long. They want to know really about your background, kind of walk through your resume to see that you are what you applied as. And then the second interview is with the hiring manager. It can be like 30 minutes to like an hour long. This might be more thorough. Also might include like a portfolio review with something that you've worked on previously. And the third interview is the longest one. I've had final interviews that are like 5 hours long on site. A lot that I'm doing right now are like 2 to 3 hours where you meet with different people at the company, usually kind of different members of the team that you'll be working on. So developers, managers, other UX designers, your hiring manager. You present a work. If you've worked on a design challenge previously, you might present your design challenge result to the different people on your team or different people on your interview panel. It's definitely more thorough, and then at the end of that, yeah, they usually get back to you with a result, whether you've got the position or not. So it's a pretty intensive process.
Yeah. It's really interesting that you like meet with people who like could potentially be on your team.
Yeah, I think also certain companies look for very specific UX designers who already kind of have maybe that domain space knowledge in like healthcare, for example, or are very good at copywriting. So they do want you to like fit into the other team members. So that's why they bring on those people in their interview.
That's really cool.
Righty, that is gonna be the end of our workshop today. Thank you so much, Sindhu, for hosting this workshop and really getting into the detail of how interaction design works, and especially with our daily products in the industry. I really love the workshop, and I really hope that you guys loved it as well. And if you want to connect with her on LinkedIn, have any type of mentor or anything, should definitely link your LinkedIn, Sindhu, in the chat, so then people can definitely connect you and reach out. We'll be having some events in the future, and if you guys are interested, please do follow us on all our social medias and stay tuned for our upcoming events. Again, thank you guys so much for coming out, and I hope you guys enjoyed this event as much as I did. Thank you, Sindhu, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your night. Thank you.
Great presenting to all of you.